today it's my pleasure to introduce the co-writers of Inside Out 2, one of the biggest movies, the biggest movie of the year. The biggest movie of the year. Last I checked, it was like 1.66 billion, but I don't know what it's up to now. That was last week, so it's probably... That's about right. It's about right? Okay. Incredible success of Inside Out 2. This is Meg LeFauve and Dave Holstein. We can clap. And you'll hear all about their writing process in just a minute. But for now, I wanted to present them with our annual, well, sometimes it's annual, but this year we're having the Achievement in Screenwriting Award that you guys will share. So I will give this one to Meg in our pretty blue bags that match the Village Bistro. Tiffany blue.
Thank you.
And this to Dave Holstein.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
That's so lovely.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
If you want to open them up and hold them up, we have our photographer.
Oh,
I can
sure.
help you. You can
Okay.
put your mics down if you want me to hold your mics.
It's a box of emotions. A box of emotions. Wouldn't that be so great? Oh, amazing.
Wait, should I take the boxes so the photo's better?
Sure.
Sorry guys, gotta publish this a little. Okay. Yeah. It's just full of drinks, right?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. That's beautiful. So beautiful.
It's really beautiful.
Really beautiful.
There you go. One, two, three. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Here, I'll give you your mic.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
So glad Nikki's here. Okay. So now that we have that behind us, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Richard Zoglin, who's going to talk to Meg and Dave about their writing process, and I can't wait to hear it as well. So enjoy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Here, you want to take my coffee from me? I hope that Starbucks will hold me for the morning. It's great to be here and really looking forward to talking about this film, especially the screenwriters, because with these animated films, it just must be such a synergistic process between the writers and the visual people. But first of all, Meg, I want from each of you how you got involved in this film. You were not particularly involved in animated films before this. Meg was the writer on the very first film. Dave came on in the second film. So tell us how you got involved.
Pixar called me and said, we're going to do Inside Out 2. Would you like to come in and talk about it? I was like, sure. But I really especially wanted to do it because of the director, Kelsey Mann. I had worked with him on The Good Dinosaur. He was the head of story on The Good Dinosaur. And I just thought he was so special and so talented. So I really wanted to come and help support him in the film. And then we started. He had pitched to Pixar the idea that anxiety takes over the mind. Because at Pixar, they don't just do a sequel to do a sequel. It has to be a sequel-worthy idea, which is why it's been quite a number of years since the first one. And Kelsey had an idea that they thought was sequel-worthy. But that's where we started. And then we worked together to say, okay, well, what's the story? And, we had to pass some challenges because Pete Docter is our executive producer. He did the first one. This is his world. So when we said, hey, Pete, let's have new emotions. Mm-hmm. The first response is, wait, what? Where have they been? Why weren't they there before? Why are they coming now? You have to have a whole, reasoning for the world rules. So we had a lot of scenes that didn't make it into the movie because ultimately you don't need them, but you still needed them to get there. So, for example, there's a waiting room where the other emotions are that we went to, and when we went there, you could see the other emotions that might be coming later, and they had it was like a bad dentist's office with bad magazines. And so we did a lot of fun things. We spitballed a lot. We worked alone together for many months, went into lockdown. Now we're doing it over Zoom. So what that means, we had a lot of access to our anxiety as research, because everybody in the world was anxious during lockdown. And our kids were right outside the door. Our research with our kids is right outside the door. So we just began to build the story. And, the thing about this story that Dave can speak to, too, is it really is three-dimensional chess because you're doing three different storylines. There's Riley's story, Joy's story down in the mind, and then Anxiety's story in headquarters. And if you came up with any scene, it had to affect all three. Right? So let's say there was a great scene that didn't make it in the movie called Procrastination Land, which was great. I hope it's going to be in the DVD extras because it's so good. But it ultimately didn't affect Riley or Anxiety. It was a cute place to go in the mind, but there wasn't a place in Riley's story that you wanted her to start procrastinating. So it just didn't make it. It couldn't affect the story in those kind of big ways. So I'd say you're always looking for what in animation can be active, right? My husband, who's here somewhere, once said, nobody wants to see, animators don't want to see, moving people's lips, right? That's the whole scene. They want to do things, right? And I would say, would you agree that you have a good scene when you're presenting it to the storyboard artist who's going to draw it, and they look so excited? And when they look like this, you're like, uh-oh.
Yeah,
Would you say?
Yeah, well, yeah. I like to believe I snuck the first monologue into a Pixar film.
I think you did.
when she loses it about halfway through, I was like, I don't know the rules yet. I think I'm just going to write a bunch of lines and see if they'll let me do this. And I think it started like at this monologue, but it got to like the longest consecutive line anyone's ever said in animation at Pixar. So I agree with you. Yeah.
But Dave, how did you come? You were not involved in the first film, correct?
No, not at all. I've been interviewing at Pixar for over 10 years. It was a dream job I was aspiring to. And I interviewed, I think, on Toy Story 4. I interviewed on Onward. I think I was going to write Onward, but I had a TV show I created on Showtime called Kidding with Jim Carrey. And that got greenlit, and I couldn't go do Onward. And then, luckily, this year I got a call, or a couple years ago, that Meg had to depart the project to work on something else with her husband. These movies take so long to make, and then I was handed the baton, and it was a dream come true. I mean, it was great.
Were you working together, or did you basically hand off?
I handed off, but we were very lucky because we knew each other. We'd actually worked together on a TV show.
20 years ago, yeah.
So I was able to call Dave, and Dave was able to call me, and so it was great.
And it never happens that way. I mean, usually in Hollywood, a writer comes on, it leaves, another writer comes on. But we had this long history together, and so it was so great because I could call Meg and
Did you
talk to her.
consult as you were writing with her, or were you on your own totally?
I mean, I was on my own creatively, but it was always great just to have. I think we had a couple breakfasts throughout the process where I would show up early, disheveled, panicking, and she would talk me off a ledge.
Must have been a lot of pressure to continue the franchise.
Not
on your
really. I
own.
mean, all that was at stake really was just the fate of Pixar itself, and the franchise and Bob Iger's salary. But otherwise, I think we did an okay job landing the plane. So
I think you
And
did.
I think that it's really great. I was so excited that it was Dave who was coming on, because he's so incredibly talented. But also, I think when you've written the first one, my brain would say things like, well, we can't do that, because I knew the first one so well that I would say, well, and the rules are, and you can't do that because of the rules, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's very helpful, I think, through that big, long stretch of creating the story, right? And really giving us incredibly a foundation for this. But I do think it was important and so great for Dave to come in, like he said, what do you mean I can't write a monologue? Of course I can write a monologue. You know what I mean? Like to have that freshness come in and push, I think is really important.
I came in and said to either Pete or Kelsey, I think I was like, who won the Oscar for Best Rules last year?
Yeah.
and that's when we cut the waiting room scene, I think. So,
Probably.
Yeah.
Meg, can we go back to the first film? How did the whole idea begin? Who had the germ of the idea?
Yeah, it's Pete Docter, and we have to,
Creative chief of
and
Pixar.
the creative chief of Pixar, but also a creative genius. I mean, I say that without, sarcastically. I mean that really, really seriously. He is a genius creatively, and he would pitch that his daughter when she was little, would answer the door and do a tap dance for you. She didn't care who you were. She was just so excited and so full of joy and very kind of out in the world. And then she turned 11, and he would show a picture of her like this. And she very withdrew. And he said, I want to know what happened to my daughter's joy, and I want to go in her head and find out. So that's how it started. When I came on, I think he was in screening 2. Just to explain, it's a good 5-year process. Sometimes they end up going faster, but it's a 5-year process. They screen the film 8 times, which means you literally you write the script, you storyboard it, they go into edit. The people in the building are the voices. And then they show it in a theater with all the 200 employees. The Disney logo comes up, the music, the whole thing, and you watch it in storyboards. And you do that 8 times. And so as writers, you're involved in all of those steps, of course, because the story is shifting and changing. And now I forgot what I was saying because I got so involved in
it's
the
funny because
process.
you just reminded me how important it is that like Pete's assistant who voices Joy for 98% of the process.
Yes.
Has to do a good job selling our story.
Yes, as a writer, sometimes you're
know.
like, I know, but but Amy Poehler can say that line.
Yeah, a lot of times you want to be like, Amy will do it better. I
Amy,
mean,
yeah.
she's very, very good.
But So when I came in, they were in screening 2, and Pete said to me, he had the emotions he wanted, because he had started with like 32 or something, and he had got it down to the 5. And they had places they wanted to go. They knew they wanted to go to Dream Productions, and they wanted to go here, but he didn't have a story yet. And he said, people are walking out of this screening saying, this is a good idea. And by now they need to be saying, this is a movie. Mm-hmm. And there's a real difference between having an idea and a movie. And which means he didn't really have a story. Mm-hmm. So I came in as a writer to help find the story. And when we struck on, this is about sadness, right? Pete would joke, I have a lot to say about fear, I thought, at this age. But in fact, what he wanted to talk about was sadness and how it binds us together and connects us.
And then, Dave, when you came along, how was the process of choosing the new emotions that would be introduced in the second film? Was that already done?
That was already done by Meg and team when I got there, which was great. And I think we still even lost 1 or 2 in the smaller ones as we went on. I think Awe was in there.
Which was?
Awe.
Awe?
Yeah, he was a bit of a stoner, to be honest.
Yeah.
He sort of came in and was really, really awed by everything, and he was great. We
Because one of our researchers, Dacker Keltner,
Yeah,
has
Dacker,
just had a
yeah.
book came out on Awe, and so they drew him to look like Dacker.
Yeah, not that Dacker looks like a stoner, but it was we did lose a couple soldiers along the way, but it was I didn't have to make any of those hard choices.
It's so fascinating to me to see how the visuals and the words work together, seamlessly. But it's sort of like the old question, which to a songwriter, what came first, the words or the lyrics? I mean, the words or the music. What does come first? I mean, do they have the concept of the marbles representing the memories? Or is that something the writer comes up with? Does it evolve as you two work together?
Well, it evolves. It starts with just the director and I, but he's also an artist, so he's often drawing his idea and trying to express to me what he's trying to say through his drawing. But really, as a writer, there can be at a certain point in the process a lot of ideas coming at you from different departments or artists, or every time you're pitching to storyboard artists, they're all drawing just out of habit, and that's how their brains work, and they're tossing them into bins. And so there's a tremendous amount of fun stuff coming at you, but in a way that can even be more challenging because you have to be very disciplined about what is the story, what's going to help the story, what's going to help Joy's journey. Because you can fall in love with things that you're like, that's so fun, but it breaks the whole movie. Shoot, we can't do that, So I would say it really starts with the writer and the director creating a story, and then really trying to find new stories every time you're doing this process. It's very iterative. It's a very iterative process. I think about it like this. A lot of these, Pixar is run by artists, And they're used to, since they were this big, drawing in those books, right? They probably have them in their attics of their childhood home, all those sketchbooks. So to them, when they're asking you to write pages, it's an iterative process. They're like, go, 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 write. I mean, the scene in the first movie where Riley comes home and says to her parents, basically, you want me to be happy, but you're not. I'm not. That really came from my childhood, but I didn't even know that because I had to write it in half an hour. Because we were going so fast at that time for that movie, but it was good because I couldn't stuff it down. Do you know what I mean? I couldn't deny it. It just kind of came up, this kind of deep emotional thing that I wanted to say to my parents. You want me to be happy, but I'm not. So there's something beautiful in the process of that iterative process. It really starts to get down to very deep personal things. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll let Dave talk, is, the process at Pixar is very personal. You're in room for days talking about your own anxiety, talking about your kids' anxiety, talking about very vulnerable things, because that's where they want you to go. The only rule I ever heard at Pixar is fail fast. They really want you out on an edge, both emotionally to make you vulnerable in terms of what you're trying artistically, where are you pushing to, but do that quickly because we're going to do this a lot and we're going to iterate a lot. So we always have to be the story God, or I don't know how we would.
I think God's work. Yeah, I feel good about that. Yeah.
Right. Because it's a lot coming at you, right?
I think I started musical theater years ago, and I always find a lot of similarities between the process of, just as you were saying, like where does the spark come first, music, lyrics, or book? And I think the answer is all the above, because you're constantly surrounded by all this beauty. There's the artist who draws something amazing, but you're not sure where that clicks in yet, or someone has a great joke, or there's all these little pieces that are all beautiful. And I feel like it's our job to sort of come in and rearrange all of those ideas into a story, and to get rid of some of the most beautiful things you've ever seen if they don't fulfill the main goal of telling that story. Mm-hmm. And I think what's hard is at Pixar you have this this bevy of riches, and you're not at loss for great art and great ideas, tons of great ideas. The challenge is when you have 300 geniuses all throwing up their best stuff, you have to say, okay, but boil it down to one question. What is the question the movie is answering? Because otherwise you're having 8 different conversations. They might all be smart, but then you're at like a dinner party in the Hamptons and everyone's talking in your ear. Like, that's not a movie. That's a dinner party in the Hamptons, which are great. But I feel like, for me, and I know for Meg, I think we work similarly, which is like, I'm always waiting for myself to take all of that inspiration and boil it down to what happens to joy as we get older, or just something that makes me return to the center lane, as Andrew Stanton likes to say, of the film. So that's my
And I just
perspective.
want to say, like, sometimes you'll get all these ideas. Like, you asked the question specifically about the balls. So when I came in, and I believe I'm going to guess it, who it was. An artist created it. Ronnie Del Carmen is I'm going to guess.
Yeah.
These balls and this idea. It might have been Pete, but we have a story problem, which is, what is joy protecting or doing in Act 2, right? And so I remember the day, out of sheer desperation as a creator, going, okay, well, what if there's like core memories? Like, what if there's just like memories that are really important because they actually help create your who you are and your personality, and and then I would say, like, the producer Jonas, he loves Disneyland. He talks about the first day he went to Disneyland as an 8-year-old. Like, that's a core memory. It's part of Jonas, right?
How many times
I'm literally so like, we have to find something. Like, it's not like some, it's like just grit of like storytelling grit, where you just have to keep going. And sometimes when you have to do that, because I always laugh when writers are like, I didn't write today because I'm not inspired. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? Some of the best stuff comes when you're not inspired, because you're just having to push. So yeah, the balls are there, like that idea's coming in, but it has to become a story. It has to become, we're constantly looking at it to say, but what's the story? So then we evolve back, right, into, oh, what about core memories? That would just be an example.
But just, I mean, how many times, just to speak to like the reach of this film, which for me, I mean, why my, like one of my life goals was to work at Pixar, is how many times has someone in conversation with you said core memory to you, not even realizing they're saying it because
know,
you
it's so
introduced it to the
weird.
lexicon. Like it's crazy.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
But it's amazing.
You know, also when you're writing, and there's so much visual wit in the film, so expressions like train of thought or sarcasm.
Pete loves a pun.
Chasm
Loves a pun. Yeah.
No, do you come up with it? Sarcasm, for example, comes up, and then the chasm, it becomes a literal thing. Who comes up with that?
There's a file. There is a running list of puns at Pixar
Yeah.
for the Inside Out franchise that I know I was given that I think you just keep contributing to over time. Stream
Yeah,
of
they'll bring
consciousness.
together 10 artists and go, and then
Yeah.
they come back with a lot of ideas. And sarcasm was done by the guy.
Who was sarcasm? Sarcasm
was-
was it John? No.
No, it wasn't John. It was the writer. He's so funny. He was one of the storyboard artists on the.
Yes.
Anyways, I wish I could give him credit because it was great. But he came in with the idea of sarcasm. But this is another great example because you're like, oh my gosh, that's so funny. How does it affect anxiety? How does it affect Riley? Where is it in her story? And more importantly, how does it affect Joy? Why does Joy, as a writer, you hear this really funny idea, but you have to ask, why does Joy in her journey need to run into a sarcasm? What does that? What is she worried about in terms of Riley having sarcastic? This opening up. How is this affecting Joy? Because if it doesn't affect Joy, it's probably gonna go.
The film, both films, are so sophisticated psychologically, and in the first one particularly, I'm wondering, there are concepts in there that I would think a kid might not understand. Did you write the film for kids and adults, or did you realize that there might be some things in there that would be a little beyond kids' understanding? Let's say abstract thought, for example.
You know, at Pixar, you're always writing for yourself and for the people around you. You're writing, which are all adults, but there's really a childlike spark in so many people there. You know, like I don't know how Pete Docter and Kelsey too. They have maintained that childhood joy and connection to life. So it just comes, that child stuff just come in. But only in the first movie, there was a concern, will kids get this? So they did do a little sample of, I think it was Fear on a diving board. Riley on a diving board, so Fear is afraid inside. And the kids got it better than the adults.
I also find you're not ever writing for a viewer to see these films once. You're writing for them to see it differently every 3 years of their life. You know, my son is 7, and Inside Out's world has a lot of Looney Tunes language that some of the other Pixar films don't have. And I know that he's gravitating to that. I know that he likes that the dynamite almost goes off, and like that's what he's watching. In 3 years, he'll have a different experience. And when he's a dad, he'll have a whole nother experience. And that to me is the sheer power of these sort of films, because they are a different movie every time you watch it as you age.
And you get there because there's always this question of, does this feel authentic? Does this feel true to your life experience as a human being? And you've been a little kid, and you're parents now to kids. I mean, if you really look at it, Joy is a parent. So it's always pushing to that vulnerable human experience so that it can ripple and have that effect out in the world.
When you started writing this, did you do any research, child psychology, or tell me what things influenced you or impacted?
We met with a lot of experts, many experts. Stacker Keltner, who was on the first movie, came in again, and
Lisa
D'Amour, who is specifically about anxiety in teenage girls. We had an expert on self-compassion come in, because for me personally, Joy is learning that she is self-compassion. That in the center of all of this sense of self, and am I good, am I bad, am I a good friend, am I a bad friend, that ultimately what she needs most is that self-compassion. So we did a lot of research. We also had a group of girls called Riley's Crew, who were 12, I think was the youngest, up to 15, 16. And they watched every screening and gave notes. They'd jump on the Zoom and they would tell us, and the 16-year-olds were really there to be the first to articulate it because they were a little bit far enough away from it, and then opened the door and let the other girls who were right in it at their age feel safe to talk about what it feels like. Because we wanted to make sure it wasn't just research and it wasn't just our own experience, because we've left that age, that it still needed to feel authentic to them. And they were great, right? I mean, they were very wonderfully direct, right? It was great.
Yeah, when they got my jokes, I felt way better than if anyone at Pixar had gotten one.
And then, of course, honestly, though, the deepest research you do is in that room talking about your own life and talking about your own experience with anxiety as at this age, or even as an adult. You know, I have a lot of anxiety, and as an adult, the only way I could figure out how to continue, I never want to let my anxiety stop me from going for what I want or interacting with life. And the only way I found that is I used to just take a breath if I had anxiety flood me, like let's say before I have a meeting to go pitch a story. And I would just take a breath and I would say, thank you, anxiety. I know you're trying to protect me, but I'm not going to die. So please, and I would picture a little red chair. This is long before Inside Out. Just go take a seat and watch. I'm going to be okay. And then later somebody said, give her a job to do. Anxiety loves to have a job to do. And so I knew when I came on the movie and it was about anxiety where we were going to end, that I wanted her to, there has to be a solution to this, right? Take a seat. So a lot of it's very personal experience with anxiety and the tools we have. I won't speak for you. Maybe you're not anxious.
No, I used to drown my anxiety in a sink, and they told me I couldn't do that scene. So, yeah, that's...
Is that kind of the message of the film to kids, if you had to sort of boil it down? I mean, I think it's, I would guess, accepting all of these emotions and that they all play a role and they're not to be disparaged or
yeah, it's funny because some people say to me, well, why are the negatives so why are the emotions so negative? And I'm like, well, they're not. That's your judgment.
That's projecting.
Now you're projecting right now. Like envy, yes, you've maybe been taught that envy is don't be envious. That's a bad emotion. No, it isn't. Envy is telling you what you want. She has a very sacred spot in your psyche, especially for women. Especially for women. Yes, you should not act on that jealousy in an evil way, right? By taking the other person down because you don't have it. No, but she's there to tell you what you want. And boy, wouldn't it be great if our young women had access to that, to know that's what I want, right? Beyond what they're being told to want.
Well, anger.
Anger, setting boundaries. Mm-hmm. They're all very, very important. Anxiety's goal is good. She's trying to protect Riley, and we do need our anxiety. It's the how that she got wrong. She can take over, and so you do need things to do in order to help that part, to not let her take over. I will also say there is something so profound in this movie that people are not talking about enough, that I will let Dave speak to as well, which is the belief system. I mean, I really think about that. Your sense of self is being created by what you believe about yourself and the world. And most of it has been taught to you. Most of it is from one incident that so got into your brain that now you're bad at math. And it's very powerful to say, is that true? Are you really bad at math? Or did you get 1 D on one test and your parents were unhappy? It's an incredibly powerful idea that your sense of self is created by these beliefs, because that means you could actually question that. You can question, is that true what you think about yourself? Is it true what you think about the world? Do all men cheat? Is that true? That's an unconscious belief that you had. You were probably taught it, maybe from experience, maybe from your parents. Is that true? So sometimes the answer is yes, but often it's no. So it's, to me, this incredibly profound idea at the center of this movie that is coming up and creating her sense of self. And for me, and Kelsey's mentioned this, one of the most powerful images in the movie is when all those emotions hug that sense of self, right? So you can't judge yourself for having that belief. You say you love yourself. You have such self-compassion for the person who created that belief inside of you to protect you whatever it was, it's there for a reason. You can just ask yourself, do you still need it? You've grown up. Do you still need to believe that about yourself? Right? And the only way you're going to get to that question of do you still need that is if you have joy as self-compassion, bringing all of the parts of yourself together to love that part of yours, to love your sense of self. I mean, that was a whole idea. I remember we were like, we had the idea for sense of self, and then we're like, what the hell is that? Is it like a statue of her? Like, that's where the artists come in and start drawing. But I think that's an incredibly profound idea. And in terms of the Pixar process, we developed that idea very early. We loved it. We knew it was incredibly powerful. But it was such a big idea. Honestly, it just kept competing with other things in the movie. And I'll be very honest, I could not figure out how to get it into the movie without it being too much. And so in a brain trust, because you go through these brain trusts, they said, you know what, it's a beautiful idea, but it's too big, just take it out. Let's just take it out. And so we took it out. And there were so many other balls in the air. It was just like, okay, yeah, one less giant ball to be. I was kind of relieved and sad all at the same time. And so when Dave came in,
I put that sucker back in as fast as I could. I drew a map of the world in the mind for Pete and Kelsey to sort of explain why I thought it was so integral to the movie. One was just a visual thing because I didn't want to repeat the first movie. There's always going to be themes that overlap, but the visual language of that first film was the memory marbles, you know, and that when I saw the belief system, I was like, oh, well, that's a great way to add a visual signature to this film that is so different than the first film and speaks to the evolution, the maturation, and so I sort of drew this map of like where the belief system was, where headquarters was, and at the back of the mind where this mountain of memories was, and then where the sarcasm was in the middle, and I just drew this line of like, well, they go back to the mountain, and then the mountain comes down, it goes into the sarcasm, goes back up, and then it clicked, because I think you do have to speak not in terms of story beats or you know themes. You kind of have to draw the thing, and I'm very bad at that. But that one drawing,
It worked.
Worked fine, yeah.
because I had them discovering the belief system as a new thing that had developed.
It was late, right?
It was
like,
way too late. And even, you know, Andrew Stanton was like, I cannot learn something brand new in Act 3. You can't do that. And I knew he was right. But intuitively, we were like, I know, but we need this. So, I mean, this genius comes in and figures it out. No, but I'm saying, like, that's part of creativity, too, is sometimes you have to let it go to have the next piece that the muses need to come in. They needed to hear it from him as a new person coming in. He figured it out. So it was a great lesson for me, too, in terms of, I believe these movies are coming from the muses, from the universe, from the ethos. They're coming, and you're an incredibly important part of it, but it's so much bigger than us.
Something I've done in writers' rooms and TV is I ask somebody to come in purposely like 10 to 15 minutes late. Because then you're sitting in a room for 15 minutes, and as a group, you've come up with an idea, and then someone walks in who has no ownership over any of that conversation and just says, well, that doesn't work. And then you have to pay attention to it. Rather, if everyone's there at the beginning and then everyone's already kind of, you know, drank the Kool-Aid, it's hard to make those changes. And I think, for better or worse, it was nice for me to come in mid-process because I didn't know any of that history. And I just said, that's a really beautiful concept, and I'd like to revisit it, you know.
Just a technical question. Traditional animation, classic animation, took forever to do the drawings. How quick is the process of this with this computer animation? An idea, and how long does it take to come back as a visual?
Well, we're at the storyboard stage. Once it moves into animation, layout and animation, you really don't want to be writing. It's just honestly way too expensive to start mucking around. And those animators are doing hours and hours and hours and hours. You
For
can't
one shot.
just
I mean,
for one
hours and
shot.
hours
Now
and
you're going to
hours.
walk in and be like, we don't need that. Could you do this? So it does happen. Sometimes in animation, they'll bring a writer in, but then you're literally like on the back of her head. Like you can't change too much. So we're in the storyboard process, but those storyboard artists are also spending hours and hours and hours. You know, what is it, like 600 drawings or 300 drawings per sequence? So they're still doing a tremendous amount.
There were, I mean, I'm going to get the number wrong, but there were at least 90,000 things, different pages drawn on this movie, maybe even more.
So, and they are also storytellers. So you give them the sequence, but they can change it. They can say, I had this idea. And sometimes as a writer, you're like, great. And sometimes you're like, no. But you really have to be respectful that this is their process with the director, and the director will lead here. It's our job to raise our hand and go, I know that's funny, but it breaks the movie. But so it's very, it's a wonderful process because we can change in storyboard, and we will. In terms of how fast they draw, they're not drawing anymore on little pieces of paper and pinning them to boards. They're literally drawing on the computers, and they're coming in. And once you get into edit, if you're in edit and you see, oh, that doesn't work, they have Cintiqs in there, and they'll start drawing and sending them right over to edit. So it's an incredibly beautiful, fast process.
Tell me about the real-world impact. I mean, you must have heard reactions from kids and parents about both films. Any anecdotes, or you know, what? How do you think it's impacted kids and their parents?
I have two stories from the first movie. The first one is I was at an awards thing that Pete couldn't go to in LA, and a woman walked up to me and said, "You have made my job so much easier." And I said, "What's your job?" And she said, "I work for the city of LA, and I go in the night of the trauma to work with the children." And it used to be so hard to get them to open up about what's happened to them and what's going on inside of them. And now we just talk about your movie. I mean, it's like,
that's the most
oh my
impactful
gosh,
thing I'd ever heard
that's
about the film.
amazing. You know, that so people are using the movie for autistic people who don't speak, right? So that's the most biggest ripple you can get. I also had a guy walk up to me and say, "You changed the way I parent." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much." He goes, "Yeah, now when my daughter's sad, I go, get Joy on the controls." And I'm like, that's the opposite of the movie. So, I mean,
Joy is the better one, right?
so sometimes people will get what they get because of their belief systems. You can only hear what your belief system will allow you to hear. So sometimes you can't reach. But in this movie, I had a woman say to me, my daughter leaned over at the anxiety end and said, "I feel like that a lot." And she didn't know that her daughter had anxiety. So that to me is like, oh, as a parent, to get to know your kid in a deeper way is amazing.
Those are both. I feel we get those a lot of professionals who come in and say that it helps give them a tool. I think one thing it also I felt anecdotally is that it's given young boys and young men a better way to talk about their emotions, and I'm always surprised by that. I last night was with the family who had seen it, and their young 12-year-old was like, bruh. And I took that to mean that he was really in touch with his ennui. And no, I mean, I let myself do that. But I did find that he was talking about his emotions to me in a way that surprised me, that at that age they can, bruh. It's a lot of bruh.
Yeah, ennui comes because we're parents. Parents of teenagers, I was like, it has to be in the movie. All your kid does is like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A crassly commercial question. The first film ends, I don't think I've seen many films that set up the sequel better than the end of the first film. You had the sequel in mind when you were doing the first film?
No, we just thought it was funny. Joke.
But obviously moving into puberty and adolescence is the logical next step. It's an adolescence without any boys in it. There's no boyfriends. Is that coming in the next film, perhaps?
Well, I can speak to why there's no boys. We really wanted it to not do that. We wanted to see what Riley's life is like for herself as a girl between other girls. At that age is very much about other girls. You might all, laugh about the boy you have a crush on, but really this is what the social interaction is happening is really with the girls, which is why the joke about the family island's this big and the friend island is that big. So that was very intentional in terms of wanting it to be, in Hollywood, when I worked for Jodie Foster, it was so hard because all female characters wanted was either about a guy or a kid. And so, women can want a lot of other things, including to save the world. So, it was trying to allow Riley to have that space right? So we could see all different sides of her and all the different things she's going through. It's why we moved in the first movie from figure skating to hockey, because hockey has a lot of more clear emotions that can be demonstrated on the ice. So we don't have anything to do with the third one, so we can't tell you anything about it.
Well, no, I totally agree. I think that it's there's a lot of low-hanging fruit you'll find as a writer in telling a love story, because the story's been told many, many, many times. So it's just harder to find your way into it in this capacity. And I'm really glad that the tools we had to work with were a hockey camp and anxiety and freshman year of high school, things that as an amalgam were a very unique story. That said, like, I think if they do multiple renditions of this film and you follow this character throughout her life, at some point they're going to have to approach that. And I hope when they do, and I feel like when they do, you know, for me, there is something beautiful about the first time you fall in love, and I hope that that is a part of the story. And I feel like there's a lot of things that you learn around there. You learn grief from a breakup. You learn a lot of things. I think that there would be a really, I trust that when Pixar crosses that bridge, that they'll do so in an excellent way. But it probably needed a whole film to rest on that idea rather than try to integrate it and compete with another idea like anxiety.
So neither of you are going to be involved in the next.
No one's called.
Don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No one's called. Do you want to talk about what your next projects are outside or?
Yeah. I'm writing now with my husband, Joe Forte, who's here in the back, or he was. Maybe he went to get a coffee. Yes. Joe's an amazing writer in his own right. Has written movies for Harrison Ford, and we just decided, oh my gosh, we might be old enough to actually do this together now, mature enough. So we have a deal at Netflix to make a film to write and direct for them. So.
Great.
I have a couple things in TV on the horizon. I have a TV show at Stars that will hopefully shoot in Italy next year. I can't say too much. I have a musical TV show that has not been announced yet. That is, it's with Chris Pine and Amy Adams. We're doing a very interesting musical TV show to take out next year. And I think I'm going to be doing some work on a Wizard of Oz for Warner Brothers.
Ooh.
So we'll see. But that's
that
all.
sounds fascinating.
Now I have to get you drunk to find out what that is.
You can just ask me.
Well, I think if anybody has any questions, go right ahead.
First of all, I'd like to compliment the Happen Film Festival for the costume coordination of your network.
I know, right? Look at this.
Oh, wow.
But I have a core memory I'd like you to tap. What was the TV show you worked on, and what was an epic fail that informs your writing to this day?
Epic
Honestly,
fail.
to be a writer, there are constant epic fails. No, it literally is. I mean, sometimes people say to me, well, I can't be a writer because my first draft stinks. And I'm like, that's being a writer. All first drafts stink. So writing is failure, right? Any creative art is about failure, and that's how you know where to go and what choices to make for the next round. Like I said, Pixar is fail fast. The show we did together was called Gigantic.
Yeah.
And it was on
Ford
Nickelodeon.
Degrassi on Teen Nick,
Yeah.
which is a network.
Right,
It
right,
is
right.
not Nickelodeon.
Right. Teen Nick,
It
right.
lasted for a year. But that's writing staff was stacked. We had a great room, and a lot of those people went on to do great
amazing things.
Yeah. I always find, to answer your question about epic failures, that like I think the epic failures in my personal life, frankly, have done more for me as a writer than any career failure I ever had. Any large mistake I ever made or time that I disappointed somebody, I think that got me to a better place as an artist than any time I would have screwed up as a, you know.
Someone else. Yes.
I've been obsessed with this film since I saw it. I watched it with my two children, and as someone with a significant history of childhood trauma, I was like, where's the trigger warning? Where's the trigger warning? So I'm sitting there having this, I felt like I did 10 years of therapy, which I've done plenty more than that in my lifetime, all in an hour and a half. And I couldn't even verbalize all of it because you had mentioned that you had some impactful experience that were young that you didn't even tap into all the emotion that invoked. And as someone who's parenting right now, a millennial, I'm really on the edge, I'm 43, but raised by this boomer generation where we know everyone, we're talking, the buzzword is reducing generational trauma. And so we're trying to operate as parents in that space. And so much of it did go straight over my children's head in what I consider to be the adult content. But they loved it. Like your 7-year-old, they had such a, they're obsessed with the movie. My daughter loves Henri. It's her favorite.
Me too.
So I'm curious sort of how that may have informed all of you, everyone working on the film. Did anyone come to you with like, this is really heavy for people not who had like a pubertal hormonal related experience, but rather like abusive childhood, severe trauma experiences in their real youth, death, sexual impact. There's
Right.
so much. I'm curious sort of how, if
Well-
you anticipated that potential response or...
Well, in terms of trigger warning, it says Pixar. So meaning Pixar's very emotional. They go to vulnerable places, right? And I mean that as a plus. That's why people like Pixar movies too, right? Because they are going to take you somewhere authentic. You know, we had another character for a long time called shame. And from all the research, all your emotions are good for you. Shame, not so much. It's the one emotion that you can think of it more like self-loathing. We had another character called guilt, because guilt is very good for you. You need guilt in order to function in a society. But the difference between guilt and shame is that guilt is feeling bad for what you did, and shame is feeling bad for who you are. And it was, I really, really wanted to do that version of the movie. Joy eventually confronts Shame, who takes the shape of Riley, and Riley says to her, "Why did you ruin me?" But it's just Shame trying to get inside of Joy to make her hate herself. But it really was such a big idea, and there was a lot of concern about, again, how deep are you going to go and rumble people, and the responsibility of that. She kind of almost needed her own movie, because just to put her in as a supporting character didn't feel responsible at some point. And she was also stealing a lot of thunder and time from anxiety, which is where we started the movie, which is about anxiety. So we eventually took her out and took that whole storyline out and really just kept focusing on anxiety. So I'd say that's the only conversation that happened that I was, and again, I'm not in all the conversations, about responsibility to the audience. And it wasn't that you can't have shame in the movie, it's that she would need more time to really, to be true to that concept psychologically.
Just quickly, I wrote a lot about this in an article in the Hollywood Reporter, but there was plenty of trauma to draw from in this film. I lost 3 grandparents over 12 months during this movie, and my father-in-law as well, and it was just a constant reminder of, we live in a world that is just continually giving us trauma to deal with, and your job is to alchemize that into something that can be good. And that's what you're thinking about the whole time you're writing the film, and then the jokes.
Which were brilliant. Every joke.
Thanks. Yes.
I just want to say I love Pixar, and I haven't seen these films, but I will, even though our son is now 21. I've seen every film that Pixar's made, and I love it. It just brings out so much emotion, and it's like a roller coaster. And the one question I have for both of you, how do you stay creative? What tool do you have to continue coming out with creativity?
Depression.
Panic. Panic and desperation, I would say, is my tool of choice.
I mean, for me, it's like I don't know. I have a 7-year-old, so that's always very helpful. There's always something new going on I didn't know about. I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's different.
It's funny because if I try to think about it, like today I'm going to be creative. Darn it, right? Nothing usually comes. Because that's way too much pressure to put on the muse and the creative. You write from the dreamer side, not the objective frontal lobe, is not writing. The frontal lobe is needed, but it's not where the creativity is. That's not the well that it's coming up from. It's coming up from the dreamer side of you, which is very a vulnerable place to be. And you've got to bring it from your unconscious into your conscious mind, which is half the trick of it. And I think that process of unconscious to conscious really helps when you're with somebody, because sometimes the way to get around that block of the brain not wanting you to talk about that or think about that is because you're verbalizing it verbally to somebody. So like, that's why I really love working with my husband, because we can create that safe space together. And you know, when you're writing a story, it's very personal and you don't even know it. I was working with my husband on a story and it just wasn't working. And he said, well, what if, you know what the problem is? I think it's because she's leaving. I think she has to walk in the door and she has to be allowed in to this house and now live in this house. And it was like the coffee shop, everything went flat. And I went, no! And, you know, and he knows me well enough and is a good enough creative to go, okay, what's going on here? Because sometimes your resistance is telling you there's something right there. Right? That the big no, or sometimes a very flat character when everybody else is very well developed. As a mentor, I'll be like, who's the dad? Because he's a cliche, and there's no other cliches in this whole script. And then you just go scratch, scratch, and this thing, because the brain is like, don't look over there, don't look over there. He's just a dad. It doesn't matter. So you have to be very brave to be creative.
Do you ever find that as you're getting more defensive out loud in your head, you're like, oh,
Yes! You're like, oh my God.
the more I go on defending this idea, the more I know it's not the right one, but
I
I'm going
know.
to keep going because I've already opened my mouth.
And my
Yeah.
husband's very patient because I can be very defensive because my emotions get up, and he's very patient with it. So it's a process of vulnerability and bravery, and I have a podcast called The Screenwriting Life, and we
Which is
call
terrific.
it lava, because sometimes as you're just dreaming a story. So the simplest answer to your question is I follow the characters. Because the dreamer's dreaming the character, not the frontal lobe. And the character will suddenly not want to go through that threshold. Literally in the story, she opens the door and she doesn't walk in. And your brain is going, yeah, just have her leave. Just go have her get on a bus and she should just leave. But there's a lot of heat rising if she steps in. I don't have to know why the heat is coming up. I just know there's that it feels very dangerous to have her step in. So guess what you have to do? You're an artist. You step in. That's the difference between craft and art. You walk, you lean, you go, okay, it's getting hot in here. I'm just going to keep going. As a producer, I could tell in the script where the writers bailed because it was so emotional, so human, so vulnerable, so authentic, and then it just wasn't. So something happened right there to the writer that they were like, no, don't go there. So to me, the creativity comes from that bravery. First, the fun. Of course, it can just be fun. Let's just think about what's the craziest thing that can happen. Which can be fun to do, but eventually the heat's going to rise, and you have to stay creative. You have to do that. Nobody's going to see it, guys. It's just on your computer, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to tell your mom or whatever.
One or two more. Yes.
So, question for each of you. I'm just curious, Dave, you have a really impressive resume before this film.
Thanks.
How pivotal is being the co-writer on the highest producer, highest grossing?
I mean, you're asking the showrunner of the least watched TV show of all time, so I can tell you, it is it's wonderful. I mean, it's so you know, I've worked very hard on a lot of projects that I'm very proud of that I thought were excellent quality wise, you know, and to be able to give an opportunity to be in a place that values both quality work and has the reach to, I mean, I went to see, my family, we live in France for some of the year in a very small town, and they had a screening in this very little theater for 160 of the school kids. And I got to go and speak afterwards and answer their questions. And it was just so surreal to be in this little town in the middle of France with a bunch of kids who are now going to see this guy wearing white glasses all the time. You're like, oh, that's the guy from the movie. But it's so special. I can't even describe it, but it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I do have to say that that this film has made 1.6 billion worldwide, which
1.7.
makes it the highest-grossing animated film of all time, and also, the last I checked, 8th on the list of the highest-grossing films of any kind of all time. So, quite a credit.
Another question, Meg. You said you came in at the second storyboard, and I'm just wondering, does Pixar just internally, literally, have the folks that are writing to that point?
No. So in the first movie, there was another writer, and they left because I think they were actually a writer-director going off to make his own movie. And Pete had places to go, and he had some jokes, and I think Bing Bong was already created as all different kinds of animals put together, but he didn't have a story yet. He had abandoned the story that they have. Josh Cooley, who was the head of story on Inside Out 1, told me that the very first story they pitched for Inside Out 1 was Riley standing in a grocery store trying to decide on which brand of chip she wanted. And I can totally hear that pitch. On the outside, nothing's happening. And on the inside, all of this stuff is happening. But that doesn't have legs to be a full movie. But I can see why they chose that as their first. But you're coming in, like on this movie, on the second movie, it's the director and I creating the story from the ground up.
I think we're about at the end of the hour, but one more.
I'm curious to know how often you embark on projects with thinking that you know how it's going to end. Of course, that can always shift, but how often you start the end in mind, and how often you start without?
That's a good question. It's funny because when I'm talking on the podcast and mentoring, a lot of people write first acts over and over and over. But you can't know what the first act is until you get to the end, because now you've got the end, so you know what the beginning is. So I love starting with an end if I can have it, but I very rarely do. I very usually start with the beginning. And just know that I don't think anything other than maybe one scene from the very first screening of Inside Out internally is in the movie. Nothing. What we learned is, and some of the intention is, but in terms of actual scenes, nothing. So in terms of an iterative process, that'll change a lot.
I feel like that great ending is always summed up as the inevitable surprise. It's that thing that feels perfect when you get there, but you didn't see it coming. And the math of that always makes me want to outline so heavily that I know the North Star I'm writing towards. I know the ending. But then sometimes you get there and you're like, oh, actually the ending is right, the beginning is wrong. The best advice I ever got in writing was from a director talking about directing, where he said, if you have a problem in your third act, you have a problem in your first act. And so many times it just helps me know where to go when I reach that end. And I'm like, why did I do all this? And there's nothing there. And then you realize, oh, there's this direct relationship between these pages and look in these pages if you don't have
all
that.
notes go back usually to the first act. Your engine is off. What I like to start with, and my husband and I start with sometimes, is the poles of the character. We know we want her to start here. So that character journey, to me, is what's creating structure. It's actually creating the story. So if you know where she's going to start and end, then that can really, you can do many, many iterations around that.
All right, I think we have to wrap up. Thank you very much. This has
Thank
been
you,
great.
guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.